Then I would like to give the floor to Ed Sander. We said we would like to exchange best practice on how to deal with the latest developments in China. Like I said, China remains booming. China is more or less open for business. If you really have to, you can go there, but it is not that easy. Ed, can I give the floor to you?
Yeah, of course. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on this call. What Dirk and I did, we had a couple of chats earlier this week, and I was asked to put together a couple of learnings about what's happening in China and what we can learn from what's been happening in the past 6 months in China. So I'll be spending about 15 to 20 minutes to share some of those things with you. A little bit of background about our own company, ChinaTalk. Our services all focus on knowledge sharing and knowledge transmission. So my wife, for instance, she's active in Chinese language and culture education. I myself, I'm spending a lot of time doing lectures and presentations on China, and besides that, I'm also leading study tours and inspiration tours, which are different from trade missions and which are much more about knowledge, gaining knowledge about e-commerce, social media, new retail, those kinds of things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share 6 learnings which I think are very important from what happened in the past 6 months, and which especially for entrepreneurs and businesses can also be very valuable. And you will see that some of the things that I will talk about have also happened here in the Netherlands, but as you will see, it happens at much higher speed in China. So the first lesson that we can learn is to accelerate all of the digital business. Now, the first thing that happened in China when the lockdown of Wuhan happened, and especially after the Chinese New Year ended, is that a lot of people needed to go back to work. And just as we are now using Microsoft Teams, and we're using Zoom, and we're using Google Meet, Chinese office staff started using DingTalk, which is by Alibaba, Tencent Meeting, and WeChat Work, which are both by Tencent, and they adopted that very fast. So this was a sort of a new segment, a new market segment for digital tooling. At the same time, what also happened is, since most people stayed inside, they didn't go to shopping malls. A lot of shopping malls were also closed, either ordered by the government to close. A lot of restaurants were closed. So the whole retail business in the start of the year during Chinese New Year, which is normally like a peak season for retail and restaurants, totally collapsed. So there was more than 20% decrease, negative growth in the retail market. And what we've seen since is this growth has started to get less and less negative. So we sort of see this V-shaped recovery that everybody is hoping for happening in China. But what is most interesting is that even though the total retail market in January to May decreased by 13.5% compared to 2019, the online retail sales kept growing. So over the same period, it had a 4.5% growth, which is maybe less than during regular years, but it kept on growing, whereas the total retail sales market was decreasing. There were certain categories, like for instance apparel, clothing, that were not doing so well, probably because people had to stay at home, so why buy new clothes? But at the same time, physical products were increasing, and especially household products, and most interestingly, grocery sales were booming. Grocery sales went up by 37%. And that's basically the second learning that we can have, that these kinds of crisis situations can result in new market segments and new target groups suddenly appearing, which might be very interesting for specific companies. So like I said, the grocery market was suddenly booming, especially in cities that had very severe lockdowns. People decided to not go out, even if they were allowed to go out every 2 or 3 days. They decided not to go out, but decided to get their groceries delivered. Now this is a market and an infrastructure that was already present in China, but it was accelerated and it started growing very fast. As you can see in this graph, for different apps in the market. Now, the most famous one is probably Geuma, also known as Fresh Hippo by Alibaba. And as you can see, they more than doubled their business. Now, it's not only that this new market segment started booming, but there were also new target audiences, target groups that suddenly started to use this type of business, which were not all that tech savvy before. So the elder generations started ordering their groceries online as well. They were probably stimulated to do so by their children, saying, well, mom, dad, please stay at home. Please order your groceries with JD Douja or with Geuma or with any other food delivery app, because it's so much safer. So, like I said, a new target audience and a new market segment that started booming. The third lesson that we can learn is we need to be willing to be flexible and to change very fast. Now, like I said, if you look at the grocery market that suddenly started exploding, there were a lot of companies at the same time that had no business. Take, for instance, Didi. Didi Chuxing is like the Chinese version of Uber, with ride-hailing apps. But because nobody was going out, and they were also quite worried to actually get into a taxi with a driver, they had very little business at that time. So what Didi started doing is they started to use their pool of drivers to actually do that home delivery. And it was not just Didi that shifted sort of their labor forces. Now, Geuma, one of the companies I just talked about, which is Alibaba's supermarket chain, and they also do home delivery. They had a problem that, as we saw in the chart, their number of orders were booming. They were exploding, but they had very limited staff as far as delivery drivers is concerned. Now, if you go around China, you will see a lot of delivery drivers on scooters for all kinds of delivery companies. But most of the time, these people are migrant workers. They actually live in the cities, but they come from the countryside. And what happens during the Chinese New Year is they go back to the countryside, go back to their families to celebrate Chinese New Year. And the Chinese New Year was also extended by the government with 1 week. So at the same time that the number of orders was exploding, there was a lack of these migrant workers being available in the cities to do that delivery of those groceries. So what Geuma did is they teamed up with several restaurant chains to actually sort of hire the overcapacity from restaurants to use in their own business. So they took the staff that didn't have work in restaurants, but was also, the government didn't allow restaurants to fire those people. Those people, in a lot of cases, especially with bigger chains, were hired by Geuma to become, during this crisis, delivery personnel. So you see a very big willingness of different companies to work together and to shift and to be flexible and to change. Now, some of the things that you see here have also happened here in the Netherlands and in the West, of course. So when the Netherlands went into a sort of an intelligent lockdown, I'm actually living right smack in the middle of the outbreak center in Noord-Brabant, in Uden. So I also decided to order my groceries online. And as you can see, I placed an order on the 23rd of March, but it actually, the first possible moment, the first available time slot for me to have that delivered is the 7th of April. So we do see that some of these things, some of these trends have also happened in the Netherlands, but it took much longer. And like I said before, it was almost like sort of a deja vu of what had happened 2 months before in China, but playing out in slow motion. The same things, but just much slower. And one of the reasons why China is so fast is because they have the digital infrastructure already available. It's not that all of these things were completely new in China, so having that right digital infrastructure is very important. Now, in China, for those of you that do business with China and have been there, you will know that a couple of very big companies like Alibaba and Tencent, they have built their own ecosystems. And these ecosystems are sort of walled gardens in so-called super apps. You have WeChat, which in its most basic form is a chat app, but you can buy your groceries, you can buy your train tickets, you can buy your movie tickets. You can basically do everything that you need to do in daily life inside WeChat, a Tencent WeChat app. Alibaba with their affiliate Ant Financial have a comparable app, Alipay, which is also used just like WeChat Pay for mobile payment. And Meituan Jianping also have an app. They started out as a food delivery company, but they also built a complete ecosystem inside an app. Now that is one of the things that we are missing in the West. We don't have super apps like this which sort of work as an operating system by itself. The advantage in China is that if you have a new functionality or like a new mini app that you want to run inside the super app operating systems, you can do it extremely fast. For instance, when there was the outbreak in January, people were very worried, and Tencent added a health section into their app that could make it possible for you to do a self-consultation so that people wouldn't all go to the hospitals or call to the doctor. You could do a self-consultation and that chatbot would very quickly tell you if you needed to go to an hospital or not. People were also very hungry for statistics. So what is happening? How many people are ill? So they also integrated that into the available app of WeChat, and you could even personalize that. So on a daily basis you would get information about the new number of COVID-19 cases in your province or in your city. Like I said, this was done within a matter of days. Another example, a bit of a controversial one, is the National Health Code. Now, we are still discussing the Corona apps, even after having the Appathon in, what was it, April, I think. It takes a lot of time, also because it's very much related to privacy. But in China, what happened is that the government basically teamed up with Alibaba and Tencent and other internet companies to develop an app that sort of screened your health information, that screened the places that you had been to. It's a bit of a black box what actually goes on and what the algorithms are. I actually think that it's much more low tech than people think, but it ended up giving you a red, yellow or green code. And if you had a green code, you basically could go back into society. If you had a red or yellow code, then you needed to go in self-quarantine for 1 or 2 weeks. But again, this was implemented in the already available systems, ecosystems of WeChat and Alipay, and this was developed within a matter of days, I think less than 1 week, and rolled out very quickly over different cities in China. The fifth lesson is adaptation of live streaming. Now, live streaming is something that is not new to China. In recent years, we have seen live streaming teaming up with e-commerce. And of course, what happened is that a lot of people stayed home and they didn't go to all of the shopping malls. So both people that were selling online on, for instance, Alibaba's Taobao marketplace, but also shops in shopping malls that didn't see any foot traffic, they were broadcasting themselves through live streaming platforms like Taobao Live. And they were doing product presentations and they were doing chats with customers to keep their business going. And again, because there were platforms like Taobao Live, but also in apps like Douyin, people could very quickly start using this live streaming. Now, the interesting thing probably for this group in this call is that this has not just happened in the B2C business, but also in the B2B business. So Lisa just showed you the possibilities of a digital trade mission, and that is also basically what happened with the Canton Fair, which is of course one of the most important trade fairs in China. They have gone online for their, I think it was the April or the May Canton Fair, and even though, just like Lisa showed you, there are some teething problems and some growing pains, they very quickly enabled people that were not able to physically visit China to still visit those traders online. The same thing happened in Jouw. And Jouw, you might know as a big wholesale center where lots of people go to check out new products and buy new products. They also went online and they started to use apps like TikTok and WeChat to get in contact with foreign buyers. So these are 5 things that have happened in China, and like I said, you will recognize some that have also happened here in the West, but the speed and the acceleration is much higher in China. So I think the last and probably the most important lesson that we can learn is that we need to look east. We are very used to seeing and watching what is happening in America, what is happening in Silicon Valley. But at the same time, things are accelerating much faster in China. What we also need to do is we need to get rid of the arrogance and the feeling of superiority that we know better, that China is just a place that copies, that steals IP. Of course, those things also happen and they're very problematic, but at the same time, I see a lot of things being copied from China. So a good example is in February, early February, the social media exploded because there was a clip online of people that were using drones to warn citizens in China to wear masks and stay at home. And everybody said, well, this is Orwellian, this is dystopian, this can only happen in China. Well, 1 month later, it also happened in Brussels, where they used the same type of drones to also warn the public to follow the lockdown rules. And even 2 weeks after that, we saw them in Scheveningen in the Netherlands. But when that happened in the Netherlands, you didn't see people talking about Orwellian and dystopian governments that were spying on us. So all of a sudden, this was sort of acceptable. So another very good example is that we've seen people taking some of the lessons from China and applying them in Europe. This is a picture that was taken in Italy, in a restaurant in Italy, and they didn't want to use any menus anymore because the menus had the danger of contamination. People could get infected when they just all handle the same menus. So this restaurant used the QR code. You scan that QR code and then you get the menu on your phone and you tell the waitress what you want. Now this might seem extremely innovative, but China has been using QR codes since 2011 for these kinds of things. And as a matter of fact, in China nowadays, if you go into a lot of restaurants, you find your own QR code on your table. You scan that, you have the whole menu, you pick a couple of items from the menu, you pay inside the app, and the waitress or waiter just comes to bring you your food. The QR code even has your table number in it. So there's these kinds of things that we can really learn from, and a lot of contactless business. We can and we need to learn a lot about that. Because if you look at what's happening in China, and even though your business might not be China related, it's like looking into a glass ball, like a fortune teller. You could see the future if you look at certain things that are happening in China, because things can go so fast there. And if you don't believe me, maybe you believe Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, who said this.
As an American, I have carried the prejudices about China in my years working with them. That they're very good at copying things, that they're very good at organizing things, that they throw large numbers of people at it, but they're not going to do anything new. They're very, very good at stealing, if you will, our stuff.
So this is the thing that we would normally think about China. This is a stereotype, right? Now, he recently did an interview in which he said that he completely changed his mind about China.
Those prejudices need to be thrown out. The Chinese are just as good and maybe better in key areas of research and innovation as the West. They're putting more money into it. They're putting it in a different way. It's state-directed in a way that's different from the West. We need to get our act together to compete.
So even he now realizes that we need to get our act together to compete, and getting your act together starts with, like I said, looking east, and at least being open and willing to learn. If you want, ChinaTalk can help you with that. That's what I wanted to share with you today.
Yeah, fantastic and very insightful and very relevant. I can remember the so-called funny videos sent on WhatsApp about people being taken out of their cars in China, and everybody indeed said that could only happen in China. And 3 months later, it happened everywhere in Europe as well. Even if I now go biking on Sunday, I order my coffee also with a QR code. So it has penetrated very rapidly. And in honesty, you also see it in digital trade missions. Who could have imagined that in this month, the RVO, not the most innovative entity in the Netherlands, would organize a digital trade mission to San Francisco. So a lot of processes have become fluid. These are challenges, but also opportunities, especially for people like us. So thanks a lot. I think 2 inspiring stories of what the future could bring to us. One question from Dirk: what ecosystem or super app would be suitable for the West? That's a very nice open question.
Yeah, you mean for using in the West? I mean, if you do business with China, you have to be on WeChat, of course, because that's the only app that you can use to cross-communicate. The thing is that there is not really such a thing yet in the West, and it would be companies like Facebook or Google or Amazon that you would expect to build an ecosystem or a super app like that. They haven't done so. They have started to copy a lot of the things that they've seen in China, but they also deal with the problem that China is just one market. And if Google or Facebook or Amazon want to do something, they deal with all kinds of different countries and all kinds of different legislation. So I don't very quickly see the same kind of ecosystem or platform come to life in the West as they have in China.
Yeah.